Well, it was October 1978. I was a freshman in my first week at college, and like all first years, I went along to Freshers' Fair, the annual bash for the various university societies to get students involved. And as I walked into the building, I was given a pen, a balloon, and a lollipop, and I was told to have fun. There was a poster on the wall above one table which caught my eye. It had a large word in the middle of it, S-E-X, sex. But underneath, in small print, it said, "Now you're interested, how about joining the University Rowing Club?" In Western society, sex sells, from chocolate to cars and clothes. Mind you, I still didn't join the rowing club. That was then. 37 years later, the sexualization of culture has dramatically increased, so that now, when a student goes to college, besides a pen, balloon, and a lollipop, free condoms are handed out at the entrance to Freshers' Fair. That's a pretty unusual way to begin a sermon, don't you think? But hopefully, it's had the same effect on you that the Freshers' Fair poster had on me. It's grabbed your attention, which is precisely what the writer of this letter to the Christians at Ephesus wants to do in the verse which began our reading. But among you, there must not be even a hint of sexual immorality or any kind of impurity or of greed. So the main subject which we're dealing with in the passage that runs from verse 3 to verse 14 is pure sex. And it is something that I want to address, and I make no apologies for it, just as the Bible does here. Not because Scripture has a low view of sex, quite the opposite. The Bible celebrates the gift of our human sexuality and seeks to protect, honor, and value its rightful expression. After all, surely the church pulpit is the place where you say the things that need to be said. It always strikes me as rather odd when Christians say, "Oh, we shouldn't talk about that in church." So where then would you talk about it? A Christian community should speak to the culture and challenge it. And that seems to be very much the Apostle Paul's understanding. Church should lead culture, not follow it. It should be, in the words of our title this morning for the sermon, it should be a counter-culture. But why does Paul have and give so much airtime to the subject right here in Ephesians 5. And why should we? Well, firstly, because Paul's world and ours are remarkably similar. Look at the picture. Now, that is not the new church building we're designing for 18 months' time. That, in fact, is the great temple of Artemis in Ephesus. One of the 7 wonders of the ancient world at the time, dedicated to the goddess of sex and women and fertility. 1,000 temple prostitutes would service the needs of worshippers every week in ritual initiations. Artemis loved a good orgy and would guarantee you a child. And that was typical of the alliance between religion and sex in the ancient world. Sexual experience, they thought, got you in touch with the divine. It brought enlightenment. You were living in the Dark Ages if you hadn't entered the world of free love. Doesn't that sound very contemporary? And of course it is. For Paul's world and ours are incredibly similar. We are the inheritors of the permissive society and the sexual revolution of the 1960s, the age of uncontrolled free expression. Dudley Moore, the actor and comedian, summed it all up. when he said, I am always looking for meaningful one-night stands. We are the children of the generation which gave us the contraceptive pill, abortion on demand, and in more recent times, with the arrival of the internet, pornotopia. You see, nothing has changed. The walls of the temple of Artemis were adorned with the equivalent of Playboy and worse. And that's why Paul wants to challenge these first century Christian believers. But among you, there must not be even a hint of sexual immorality. Stop thinking with your groin, is what Paul is saying. Well, he knew that the battle for purity is won in the mind. And that's a second reason why he gives this subject so much airtime. And we picked up the idea, if you were here last Sunday morning, at verse 22. In the Christian's dress code, Paul says, you put off your old self and you put on your new self. How does that happen? By the renewing of the mind. So here's Paul nailing the issue again. Because what feeds the mind shapes the life. I was staggered, but not surprised, to discover this week that between the ages of 6 and 18 years of age, the average child spends some 15,000 to 16,000 hours in front of a TV or computer screen. You realize that by the time we're 21, we will have watched 1 million commercials at the rate of 1,000 a week? No wonder we're in trouble as a society. And that's where Paul moves the argument forward here. He's not now concerned, as he was last week, primarily with how the Christian relates to each other in church, but here, how the church engages with and impacts society. So thirdly, the Christian community offers an alternative society. It is to be a counterculture. Now, throughout the history of the Christian church, we've had an up and down, an in and out relationship to society. We've tended to swing between the rabbit hole option or the chameleon option, either disappearing down a hole or blending completely into our environment like that chameleon lizard type thing. The rabbit hole option is when the Christian and the church so cut themselves off from the world that though they have really important things to say, no one's listening to them. It's the problem of having a message but no audience. So Christians spend time only with other Christians. They have only Christian friends. They hop from one Christian meeting to another and then burrow down until it's time to put their head out and hop along to the next Christian event or Christian conference. So it's church on Sunday, it's prayer meeting on Monday, it's small fellowship group on Tuesday, it's committee meetings on Wednesday, it's Christian social group on Thursday, and then, hey, guess what? It's the church camping weekend, Friday to Saturday. By the way, I think the church camping weekend is a good idea. But you get my point. There was a very extreme and funny example of this rabbit hole option in the first century among the Christian community. It was called the bruised and bleeding sect. Now, they got that unusual name from the fact that the men who belonged to the community wore blindfolds whenever they went outside into the streets. Covered their eyes with a blindfold. And of course, this stopped them seeing women and having improper thoughts or urges. Trouble was, it didn't stop them falling over or bumping into walls or lampposts. Hence their name. The bruised and bleeding sect. The opposite model is the extreme of the chameleon model. Here, the Christian and the church are so much like the society in which it lives that though we have an audience, now we've lost our message and we've nothing really different to say. We take on the colors of the environment to such an extent that you can't really distinguish us at all from the society in which we're living. But what Paul is arguing for here is a third way, the countercultural option, where we are involved but different, where we are engaged but distinctive, where we are in the world but not of it. Let's call this the pigtail and chopsticks model, in honor today of that remarkable character, Hudson Taylor, who we were thinking about earlier with the young people and the children. For that's what Hudson Taylor's critics called him, the pigtail and chopsticks man. When 150 years ago, aged 21, hear me, aged 21, he went to China as a missionary. He staggered the Christian world of the time by having his head shaven off, except for that distinctive Chinese pigtail, the queue. He wore Chinese clothes. He adopted Chinese customs and etiquette. He even lived in a Chinese house among the Chinese community rather than a missionary compound. And asked to defend his approach on one occasion, he said, "Surely no follower of this meek and lowly one will be likely to conclude that it is beneath the dignity of a Christian missionary to seek identification with these people. Let us rather," he said, "be imitators of him who washed his disciples' feet." Now that reference to Jesus, the ultimate missionary, takes us rather nicely to the details of our text in Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 1. "Be imitators of God, therefore, as dearly loved children, and live a life of love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God." You see, this is why we are called to a counter-cultural relationship to the world around us. Fully involved, yet totally different, because Jesus was. Jesus, the supreme example of a counter-cultural life. He lived a life of self-giving, of sacrificial love. He moved into our neighborhood. He gave himself to others, finally paying the ultimate price of love in his death upon that cross. And through the cross, Jesus shows us that true love doesn't love somebody because they're worthy. True love makes them worthy. True love doesn't love someone because they're beautiful. It loves in such a way that it makes them beautiful. And then see what Paul does at verse 3. He takes that amazing model of divine love and he says, now look what humanity has done with love. We've turned it into the lust and covetousness of sexual greed. Self-sacrifice has become self-indulgence and self-gratification. Love becomes all about me, not others. When Woody Allen faced the media and explained his sexual relationship with the adopted teenage daughter of Mia Farrow, he eventually shrugged his shoulders and said, "The heart wants what it wants." And in that appalling confession, Woody Allen was simply stating what has become the guiding principle of 21st century ethics. If it feels right, it is right. Now that's the way that people thought and behaved in the Ephesus of the first century. It's the way that many, many people think and behave in the 21st century. What is right has become what is right for me. I realized again this week the genius of the technology giant Apple's marketing strategy. Apple is a remarkable example of our culture. Why its appeal to millions of people the world over is so strong. Because Apple and all its technology plays right into this view of ourselves as the center of everything. Welcome to the I world. The world of the iPhone and the iPod and the iPad and the iMac. Steve Jobs brilliantly understood the spirit of the age, a spirit of unfettered individualism and freedom to be who I want to be and do what I want to do, so long as I don't hurt anyone else. I can be whoever I want to be and express myself however I see fit, which includes having sex with whoever I want to have sex with. My choices are my own. Listen, who else but our generation could come up with the word selfie? All right, let's move on. Let's move on to the essential difference of a countercultural community. What does it look like to be made new in Christ, to put off the old self and put on the new by the renewing of our mind? What does it look like to belong to the unselfie generation? Firstly, we adopt a radical lifestyle. Did you hear the phrases in verse 2? Among you there must not be even a hint of sexual immorality. The phrase of verse 11, have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness. Verse 12, don't even mention these things that they do in secret. That is so radical. And Jesus had the same approach. Remember in the Gospels, you have heard it said, do not commit adultery, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Now, Jesus isn't saying that you're not to look at women or find them attractive. He is saying, don't look twice, in the sense of looking at them as objects of self-gratification. And in making that radical case, Jesus dignifies women and shows how men should respect and treat them. And he's also highlighting how powerful and damaging the sex drive can be. So he continues, does Jesus, with radical advice for moral surgery. If your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. That's why Paul makes so much of this issue of sexual morality. Not because sexual sins are worse than others. We in the evangelical world have done a great disservice in this area. Paul is not going on about this issue of sexual morality because sexual sins are worse than others, but because when we get it wrong in this area, the consequences can be catastrophic for family and marriage and children and the wider society. So, not a hint of it among you. Have nothing to do with it. Don't even mention it, says the apostle. And maybe that's our problem. We are so surrounded and bombarded by the messages of a sexualized culture that little by little we allow a hint of this and a mention of that. We become desensitized. We behave like the man in the tale of the Arab and the camel. One cold night, an Arab sat in his tent, and the camel gently thrust his nose under the flap and looked in. Master, he said, let me put my nose in your tent. It's cold and stormy out here. By all means, said the Arab, and welcome, as he turned over and went to sleep. A little later, the Arab woke to find that the camel had not only put his nose in the tent, but his head and neck also. The camel, who had been turning his head from side to side, said, "I will take but little more room if I place my forelegs within the tent. It is difficult standing out here." "Yes, you may put your forelegs within," said the Arab, moving a little to make room, for the tent was very small. Finally, the camel said, "May I not stand wholly inside? I keep the tent open by standing as I do." "Yes, yes," said the Arab. "Come wholly inside. Perhaps it'll be better for both of us." So the camel crowded in, and the Arab, with difficulty in the crowded quarters, again went to sleep. But when he awoke the next time, he was outside in the cold, and the camel had the tent to himself. Not even a hint of it among you. Have nothing to do with it. Don't even mention it. So we adopt a radical lifestyle. Secondly, we learn a new language. And that language can be summed up in one word, according to verse 4. "Nor should there be obscenity, foolish talk, or coarse joking, which are out of place, but rather thanksgiving." Thanksgiving. That word really sums up the entire Christian perspective on life. We are thankful people. We recognize who has blessed us. We know the giver, and we're grateful for his gifts. So thanksgiving is the word which elevates all of human experience, including our sexuality, to its proper place as a gift we receive from God, our Creator. So we value marriage by the way we speak of it and honor it. Pagans vulgarize and trivialize sex. Christians sanctify it with thanksgiving. Third main head: the compelling reasons for a countercultural commitment. Why do Christians think and live like this? Is it because we are boring, repressed, and have no sense of humor? No. For the Christian, casual sex is a parody of the real thing. It's like listening to an MP3 recording of a glorious Beethoven symphony when a world-class orchestra is playing in the theater around the corner. It's because sex is a good and important part of God's creation, a means of intimacy in marriage and procreation, the context for blessing and fulfillment, that we must protect it and avoid its cheapening. Listen, in the Christian worldview, there is no such thing as just sex. But there are four compelling reasons in particular which Paul gives in our passage. The first is there in verse 5. "So that we may enjoy our future inheritance. For of this you can be sure, no immoral, impure, or greedy person, such a man is an idolater, has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God." That's the first compelling reason for a countercultural commitment, because through it we enjoy our future inheritance. Now, Paul is not saying that a single immoral thought, that a marital affair disqualifies us from God's kingdom. I want you to hear me on this. There is forgiveness and grace to be found in the arms of God right now. If you've come with a load of baggage of mistakes you've made in this area, then you need to know that there is forgiveness and grace in the arms of God. What Paul is saying is that the unrepentant, the persistent sinner who remains committed to that lifestyle, the slave of uncontrolled sexual greed, has chosen an idol that cannot save him. For, you see, sex and money and power are idols, and we are delusional if we think they can satisfy us. And that moves us towards the second compelling reason. Not only will we inherit the kingdom of the future, but secondly, we will avoid the wrath of God in the present. Verse 6, let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of such things, God's wrath comes upon those who are disobedient. In the present is what Paul is saying. The wrath of God here is what happens when people try to live without God's best for them and reap the consequences in cheap alternatives and broken families. All around us, we see the evidence of this. A society which promised itself freedom in the 1960s has woken up to a new and terrible slavery. More divorces, more marriage breakdowns, more teenage pregnancies, more disillusionment, more despair, more loneliness, more insecurity, and a pornography industry which has more revenue than Microsoft, Amazon, and Google put together. That's the freedom, so-called, that we have. You see, we have the wrong idea of freedom if we think that it's to live without reference to the God who made us and knows how human life works best. You might like to liberate your goldfish as he swims around the goldfish bowl day after day. Okay, why not give him the freedom of the living room carpet and see how long he survives? It doesn't work that way. Man without God, like a fish out of water, is free only to die. So how then do we live with this right view of God and what is best for human life? Well, here comes the third reason in verse 8. For you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Live as children of light. Third compelling reason, be who you are. Children of light. Belief and behavior always go together, don't they? What we do comes out of who we believe we are. So you see, if I believe that I am little more than an evolved higher animal, then I will behave like one. If I believe that relationships are disposable, then that's the way I will treat people, like plastic cups. If I believe that sex is merely a recreational appetite, then I will disconnect the act of sex from the person and the relationship. So who are we? We are children of light. We are connected by faith to the light of the world. That's how we are to live, which means, according to verse 10, finding out what pleases God and letting his light shine. Who are those people? Asked the little boy of his mother as he looked up at the stained glass windows of a church on a bright summer's day. They are the ones through whom the light shines, his mum said. The saints. That's who we are. The ones through whom the light shines. So be who you are, says Paul. And when we live like that, on the one hand, we will expose the cheap alternatives around us, and on the other, the light of faith attracts people. You see that, verse 11? Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. Verse 13, everything exposed by the light becomes visible, for it is light that makes everything visible. We lead culture by transforming it, not by following it. Do you know what I think one of the greatest weaknesses of the 21st Western church is? It's our desperate attempt to be relevant to the culture. And I believe that is the primary reason why we are largely irrelevant to the culture. Because we're desperate to be relevant. Look, the principle of the Bible here is this. We attract society by being different from it, not the same as it. My friends, the world out there does not want to see more of the same. We need to be offering radically better alternatives. See, here's my theory. why we're not seeing more people come to the light of Christ. Because we Christians are like everyone else. We're no different really to the rest of society except that we attend church on a Sunday. We make the biggest impact by being different, not by being the same. The final compelling reason is sing to the music of the light. That's what verse 14 is all about. Wake up, O sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine upon you. It's in speech marks because probably it's a fragment from an early Christian hymn, a lyric that was sung at someone's baptism. Well, if you were there last Sunday evening at the beach, you know that we baptized 7 people in the sea last Sunday night. Let me tell you, that woke me up, even with a wetsuit on. So this is a Christian hymn, a wake-up call to rise and live in the light of King Jesus. You've left the past behind, says the song. Embrace the future. March to the beat of its drum. One of the reasons why we sing so much as Christians is because singing informs the mind, helps shape the way we see things. That's why we sing in church. And it's really important. Content matters, not just melody. That's why the music you listen to 7 days a week, not just the stuff you watch on TV, is really significant. Because music feeds the mind, which feeds the soul. So if your iPhone playlists are merely and only soppy romantic ballads, then that's how your views of love and sex are going to be shaped. Listen to this bit of pop nonsense from the 1980s, which the film 4 Weddings and a Funeral made famous again not that long ago. I won't sing it to you. You probably know it. I feel it in my fingers. I feel it in my toes. Love is all around me, and so the feeling grows. You know I love you. I always will. My mind is made up by the way that I feel. What? How can I be sure that you will always love me if your mind is made up by your feelings? Because they come and go. It's been said, if you want to show someone that you really love them, don't take them to bed. Walk them down the aisle first. What is on your Christian playlist, eh? What are you listening to? Wake up, O sleeper. Rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. Live in the light of your conversion. Sing the song of your new life, of waking from death and walking in light. Dance to its rhythm. For God is mighty to save. And that's on our playlist now. So as the group comes up, to find their places on the platform, let's think about these words that we're about to sing. Shine your light and let the whole world see. We're singing for the glory of the risen King. Jesus, shine your light and let the whole world see. So take me as you find me, all my fears and failures, and maybe this morning, fears and failures in this area of sexual purity, and the baggage that we're carrying, and the issues that we're struggling with. Take me as you find me. All my fears and failures, fill my life again. That's the anthem. That's the song. Let's stand and sing it together.